Across distant lands, people once shaped stone and earth into wonders no one expected. No machines, just teamwork, vision, and determination. These creations refuse to disappear, still challenging us to understand how far human hands can reach. Chapter 1. Göbekli Tepe. The first monument builders, long before farming villages spread across the Near East. Before pottery, metal tools, or written language, people gathered on a limestone ridge in what is now southeastern Turkey and built something no one expected. They raised massive stone pillars, carved them with animals, and arranged them in carefully planned circles. Then, after centuries of use, they buried the entire site on purpose and left. This place is Göbekli Tepe. It sits near the modern city of Şanlıurfa, overlooking a wide plain that once supported herds of wild animals and seasonal plant life. For most of the 20th century, the hill appeared ordinary. Stones poked out of the soil. Farmers worked the land. In the 1960s, a brief survey noted unusual fragments but classified them as recent remains. Nothing suggested that this mound held the oldest known monumental structures on Earth. That changed in the 1990s. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt returned to the site with fresh eyes. As soon as excavation began, it became clear that Göbekli Tepe was not medieval or even Bronze Age. Massive carved stones emerged from the ground. Their shapes were deliberate. Their arrangement was intentional. Radiocarbon dating soon placed the site around 9,600 BC, more than 11,000 years ago. At that time, according to long-standing ideas, humans lived as small groups of hunter-gatherers. They moved with the seasons. They did not build large structures. They did not organize huge labor projects. Civilization, it was believed, began only after agriculture made permanent settlements possible. Göbekli Tepe forced a rethink. What archaeologists uncovered were circular enclosures made of tall, T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing more than 10 tons. Each circle had two larger pillars at its center, facing one another. The pillars were set into carved stone sockets and linked by low walls. Their surfaces were smoothed and decorated with reliefs of animals. Foxes, snakes, wild boars, birds, and insects appear again and again, carved with skill and confidence. Some pillars even show abstract human features. Arms run down the sides, hands meet at the front. There are no faces, but the form suggests something more than decoration. These stones may represent beings, ancestors, or symbolic figures important to the people who gathered here. What makes this even more striking is what is missing. There are no clear houses at Göbekli Tepe, no hearths for daily cooking, no piles of household waste. This was not a village. It appears to have been a place people traveled to, possibly from many surrounding regions. A shared center, built for gatherings rather than living. This raises a difficult question. How did people without farming support such work? The answer lies in coordination. Quarry marks around the site show where limestone was cut using stone tools. Experimental archaeology has shown that with enough people, simple tools, and time, stones of this size can be moved and raised. Food would have come from hunting and gathering, likely supported by seasonal abundance. This was not a small effort. It required planning, leadership, and shared purpose. In other words, social organization existed before agriculture. This turns the traditional story of civilization upside down. Instead of farming leading to religion and monuments, Göbekli Tepe suggests belief and ritual may have brought people together first. Shared meaning may have come before settled life. The site also shows long-term continuity. New enclosures were built over centuries. Each followed a similar pattern but with differences in size and carving style. Knowledge was passed on, skills improved. This was not a one-time experiment. It was a tradition. Then around 8000 BC, something remarkable happened. The people who used Göbekli Tepe began to bury it. Enclosures were filled with rubble, broken stone, and soil. This was not neglect. It was deliberate. The pillars were carefully covered and sealed. Once buried, the site was never used again. Over time, the hill took on a natural shape, hiding the structures until modern excavation uncovered them. Why bury something so carefully built? There is no final answer, but archaeology offers clues. Around this period, early forms of agriculture were spreading in nearby regions. People began to settle more permanently. Daily life changed. A mobile ritual center may no longer have fit a world focused on fields and herds. Beliefs may have shifted. New ways of organizing society may have replaced old ones. What matters is how the burial was done. By covering the pillars, the builders preserved them. Wind and rain could no longer erode the carvings. In a strange way, the act of burial protected the site for thousands of years. It feels intentional, even respectful. Only a small part of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated so far. Ground surveys suggest many more structures remain underground. Each new enclosure could add detail or raise new questions. The people themselves remain mostly unknown. No graves clearly tied to the site have been found. No names. No stories written down. They exist only through stone. Göbekli Tepe is one of the most important unexplained ruins ever discovered, not because it relies on mystery, but because it challenges what we thought we knew. It shows that human beings organized, planned, and built monumental spaces far earlier than expected, using nothing but stone tools, shared belief, and cooperation. Chapter 2. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Precision without power tools. By the time the Great Pyramid of Giza began to rise from the desert, Egypt was no longer experimenting with power. It had mastered it. Around 2580 BC, during the reign of King Khufu, the Old Kingdom reached a level of organization that allowed a single project to reshape the landscape forever. What still amazes the modern world is not just the size of the pyramid, but the precision behind it, achieved without iron tools, machines, or modern mathematics. The Great Pyramid stands on the Giza Plateau, just west of the Nile. From a distance, it looks simple. Four sloping sides rising to a point, but that simplicity hides an extraordinary level of planning. Each side of the pyramid is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. North, south, east, and west are matched with an accuracy that modern surveyors still respect. The base is nearly level, with a difference of only a few centimeters across its entire span. This precision was achieved more than 4,500 years ago. The pyramid was built from an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. Most are limestone, quarried nearby. The outer casing stones, once smooth and gleaming, were cut with extreme care. The interior chambers use granite hauled from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers to the south. Some of these granite blocks weigh over 50 tons. No iron tools were available. No wheels were used for transport. And yet the stones were cut, moved, lifted, and placed with consistency. For a long time, this led to exaggerated ideas, lost technologies, unknown machines, even non-human builders. But archaeology tells a different story, one grounded in human effort and state organization. Excavations near the pyramids have uncovered the remains of worker villages. These were not slave camps. They were planned settlements with bakeries, breweries, sleeping quarters, and medical care. Animal bones show a diet rich in meat, bread, and beer. Inscriptions left by work crews give us names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, suggesting pride and identity, not forced labor. This fits with what we know about the Old Kingdom system. During the annual Nile flood, farming paused. The state redirected labor toward royal projects. Workers were paid in food and goods. This system allowed tens of thousands of people to work in rotating crews without collapsing the economy. Quarrying techniques are well documented. Limestone blocks were cut using copper chisels, stone hammers, and wooden wedges. Workers exploited natural cracks in the rock. For granite, harder stone tools and abrasion with sand were used. The process was slow but reliable. Transport was equally practical. Reliefs and experiments show stones placed on wooden sleds, dragged across prepared tracks. Water poured in front of the sled reduced friction, making movement easier. This method has been tested in modern experiments and works exactly as described. The question of ramps has been debated for decades. No single ramp design has been proven, but evidence supports several possibilities. Straight ramps, zigzag ramps, and internal ramps may all have been used at different stages. What matters is that ramps were temporary. They were dismantled as the pyramid grew, leaving little trace behind. Inside the pyramid, the complexity increases. The internal layout includes the descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, the queen's chamber, and the king's chamber. The grand gallery rises steeply, with corbelled walls that shift weight outward. The king's chamber contains massive granite beams stacked above the ceiling to relieve pressure. This shows a deep understanding of stone behavior and load distribution. None of this required modern theory. It required experience, observation, and testing over generations. The Great Pyramid did not appear out of nowhere. It followed earlier pyramids built by Khufu's father, Sneferu. These earlier projects, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, show experimentation. Angles were adjusted, designs were refined. By the time Khufu ruled, the system was ready. This brings us to the real mystery. How did a society without modern technology achieve such consistency across millions of stones? The answer lies in centralization. The Old Kingdom was a highly organized state. Resources flowed toward the king. Scribes tracked materials. Officials managed labor. Religious belief reinforced obedience. The pyramid was not just a tomb. It was a national project tied to cosmic order and royal power. This level of coordination did not last forever. Later periods would struggle to match it. But for a brief window, Egypt held everything together. Today, the Great Pyramid stands as proof of what human systems can achieve without machines, when belief, labor, and planning align. It does not require mystery to be impressive. Its true power lies in what it reveals about early state authority and human cooperation. Chapter 3: Stonehenge, Moving Giants Across Ancient Britain. On a wide open plain in southern England, a ring of stone has stood through wind, rain, and centuries of change. Long before metal tools, written records, or large cities appeared in Britain, people gathered here and raised stones so large that even today they seem out of place. This place is Stonehenge, and its story is not about a single moment of construction, but about patience, movement, and long memory. Stonehenge sits on Salisbury Plain in what is now Wiltshire. To a modern visitor, it can feel isolated, but in the Neolithic world it was part of a much larger landscape. The area around it contains burial mounds, ancient pathways, and ceremonial sites. Stonehenge was not built alone. It belonged to a network of places that mattered deeply to the people who lived here. The earliest activity at the site began around 3000 BC. At that time, there were no standing stones. Instead, people dug a circular ditch and bank, forming a large earthwork. Inside this circle, they placed wooden posts and dug pits that later held cremated human remains. This tells us something important. Stonehenge began as a place connected to death, memory, and ritual, long before the famous stones arrived. The stone monument most people recognize today came much later, and it was built in stages. The largest stones at Stonehenge are called sarsens. These are blocks of hard sandstone, some weighing more than 25 tons. They were shaped into tall uprights and topped with horizontal lintels, joined using carved joints similar to woodworking techniques. These stones likely came from the Marlborough Downs, about 30 kilometers to the north. That distance may not sound extreme, but moving stones of that size without wheels, animals, or metal tools was a serious challenge. Archaeology gives us clues about how it was done. Stone tools, wooden sledges, ropes made from plant fibers, and sheer human effort were likely used. The stones were probably dragged across prepared tracks, possibly lubricated with water or animal fat. Moving a single sarsen could have taken hundreds of people working together, step by step, over weeks or months. Even more surprising are the smaller stones, known as bluestones. These stones weigh less than the sarsens, but their journey was far longer. Geological studies have traced their origin to the Preseli Hills in western Wales, more than 200 kilometers away. This discovery changed everything. It meant that Stonehenge was not just a local project. It involved long-distance movement, planning, and coordination across regions. How the bluestones were transported is still debated. Some may have been carried by boat along rivers and coastlines, then hauled over land. Others may have been moved entirely by land. What matters most is that people chose to move them at all. These stones were special. Their source mattered. Their presence at Stonehenge was intentional. Radiocarbon dating shows that bluestones were placed, removed, and rearranged multiple times over centuries. Stonehenge was not a finished design. It was a living project, changing as beliefs and needs changed. Raising the stones required more than strength. It required planning and knowledge. Holes were dug with sloping sides. Stones were tipped upright using ropes and wooden frames. Earth was packed back into place to secure them. Lintels were lifted and fitted carefully on top, using carved joints to lock them in place. This level of precision suggests experienced builders who had learned from earlier projects. Stonehenge also shows a deep connection to the sky. The monument is aligned with the movements of the sun. On the summer solstice, the sun rises along a central axis of the stones. On the winter solstice, it sets in alignment with key features of the circle. These events would have marked important moments in the year, tied to seasons, farming, and ceremony. This does not mean Stonehenge was an observatory in the modern sense, but it was clearly designed with the sky in mind. The builders understood cycles of light and dark, and they embedded that knowledge in stone. Over time, the purpose of Stonehenge appears to have shifted. Early use focused on burial and ancestry. Later phases emphasized gathering, ceremony, and shared identity. The effort required to build and maintain the site suggests it brought people together from wide areas. It may have been a place where communities met, exchanged goods, formed alliances, and remembered the dead. What Stonehenge shows us is not lost technology, but long-term commitment. It was built slowly, across many generations. Each group added to what came before. No single ruler ordered it. No single moment explains it. Stonehenge is the result of continuity. Chapter 4. Puma Punku. Precision. Stonework in the Andes. High on the Andean plateau, where the air is thin and the horizon feels endless, lies a place that seems to resist easy explanation. Scattered across the ground are massive stone blocks, many of them cut with sharp angles, straight lines, and precise grooves. Some fit together like parts of a puzzle, even though they now lie broken and displaced. This place is Puma Punku, and for more than a century it has challenged how people think about ancient stoneworking. Puma Punku is part of the larger Tiwanaku complex in modern-day Bolivia, near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca. The site sits at an altitude of almost 4,000 meters above sea level. Even today, construction here is difficult. For the people who built Puma Punku more than 1,000 years ago, the challenges would have been immense. Early visitors to the site were struck by what they saw. Huge blocks of stone lay toppled and scattered, as if thrown apart by a powerful force. Some blocks weighed more than 100 tons. Others were smaller but far more detailed, carved with notches, grooves, and right angles that appeared almost machine-like. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, these features led to wild ideas about lost civilizations and unknown technologies. Modern archaeology paints a different picture. The Tiwanaku civilization flourished roughly between 500 and 1000 AD. It was one of the most powerful societies in the Andes before the rise of the Inca. Tiwanaku controlled trade routes, managed large farming systems, and built monumental architecture using local materials and skilled labor. Puma Punku appears to have been one of its most important ceremonial and architectural projects. The stones used at Puma Punku came from two main sources. Red sandstone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, were quarried from sites about 10 kilometers away. Harder andesite blocks, used for the most precise carvings, came from quarries near Lake Titicaca, across water and rough terrain. Moving these stones required planning, coordination, and manpower, but not advanced machines. Tool marks on the stones tell a clear story. Archaeologists have identified signs of stone hammers, hammerstones, and copper tools. The high precision was achieved not by cutting in a single step, but through repeated abrasion. Sand and water were used to grind surfaces flat. Edges were refined slowly. Measurement was likely done using cords, straight edges, and careful repetition. This kind of work takes time, not technology. The famous H blocks of Puma Punku show this process clearly. Their surfaces are smooth, but not perfectly uniform. Small variations can be measured. The angles are sharp, but not mathematically perfect in the modern sense. What they show is consistency, not machine precision. Skilled human hands, guided by shared standards, produce stones that could interlock and align in complex ways. Why interlocking shapes were used is still debated. One reason may have been stability. The Andes are a seismic region. Interlocking blocks resist movement during earthquakes better than stacked stones. Another reason may have been symbolic. Repeating shapes and modular designs suggest a planned architectural language, possibly tied to ritual or cosmology. What Puma Punku did not have is mortar. The stones were meant to fit together tightly on their own. Metal clamps, sometimes poured from molten copper alloys, were used in some places to lock stones together. These clamps were cast in place, showing knowledge of basic metallurgy and planning. Transporting the stones remains one of the most discussed challenges. Without wheels or draft animals, stones were likely moved on sledges, rollers, and ropes. Lake Titicaca may have played a role, allowing stones to be floated on reed boats for part of the journey. Experiments and ethnographic parallels show that such methods are slow but effective when enough people work together. The layout of Pumapunku suggests it was once carefully organized. Platforms, gateways, and aligned stones point to a larger architectural plan. What we see today is not a finished monument, but a site that was dismantled by time, earthquakes, and later stone reuse. Many blocks were moved or repurposed long after Tiwanaku declined. This brings us to a key mystery. Why did construction at Pumapunku stop? The Tiwanaku civilization declined around 1000 AD. Climate data from the region shows periods of prolonged drought. Tiwanaku's farming system depended on raised fields that managed water carefully. When rainfall patterns changed, food production likely suffered. Political authority weakened. Large state projects became impossible to maintain. There is no evidence of a sudden invasion or catastrophe at Pumapunku. Instead, the site appears to have been abandoned gradually. Work stopped. Stones were left unfinished. Over time, the structures fell apart. Pumapunku feels dramatic today because we see it in fragments. Broken stones create the impression of chaos. But when viewed through archaeology, the site reflects careful planning, skilled labor, and a society that invested heavily in stone architecture until it could no longer support such efforts. The real achievement of Pumapunku is not mystery, but method. It shows how precision can emerge from repetition, patience, and shared knowledge. It reminds us that complex engineering does not require modern tools, only time, organization, and experience. Chapter 5. Machu Picchu. Earthquake-proof without cement. High in the Andes, where steep ridges cut through clouds and rivers fall thousands of feet into narrow valleys, a city of stone clings to a mountain saddle. Even today, reaching it requires effort. Paths climb sharply. Weather shifts quickly. The ground itself feels alive, shaped by fault lines and constant pressure. This is Machu Picchu, built by the Inca in the 15th century, and it remains one of the clearest examples of how ancient builders worked with nature instead of trying to overpower it. Machu Picchu was not meant to be seen from afar. From the valley below, it disappears into the landscape. Stone walls mirror the color of the mountain. Terraces step down the slopes like natural shelves. This was intentional. Inca builders believed good construction followed the shape of the land. A building that fought the mountain would fail. A building that listened to it would last. The city was built during the reign of the Inca ruler Pachacuti, around 1450 AD. By this time, the Inca state controlled a vast stretch of South America. Roads connected mountains to coastlines. Storehouses held food for years. Labor was organized through a system where communities provided work to the state in exchange for protection and resources. Machu Picchu was a product of this system, not a mystery project hidden from history. What makes Machu Picchu remarkable is not its size, but its precision. The most famous walls are built from granite blocks, fitted together so tightly that a knife blade cannot slide between them. There is no mortar holding them in place. Each stone was shaped to match the stones around it, with curved edges and angled faces that lock together. This technique, known today as dry stone masonry, creates structures that can flex during earthquakes. When the ground moves, the stones shift slightly and then settle back into place. This is why Machu Picchu still stands. The region experiences frequent earthquakes. Buildings made with rigid materials crack and collapse. Inca walls move and survive. Doorways and windows are trapezoidal, wider at the bottom than the top. This shape adds stability and helps distribute weight. Walls lean slightly inward, strengthening them against shaking. None of this required advanced tools. The Inca did not use iron or steel. They worked granite using harder stones, hammering and grinding surfaces slowly. Evidence from quarries near Machu Picchu shows stones partially shaped at the source, then refined on site. Builders used patience, repetition, and skilled hands. Each stone took time. Precision came from effort, not speed. Labor was carefully organized. Workers lived nearby, supported by state food supplies. Tasks were divided. Some cut stone, others shaped it. Others moved it using ropes, levers, and wooden supports. Large stones were slid, tipped, and guided into place. This work required coordination and shared knowledge passed down through experience. Machu Picchu was also carefully planned. The city is divided into distinct areas. There are residential zones, ceremonial spaces, agricultural terraces, and water systems. Fresh water flows through carved stone channels, fed by natural springs. The water system still works today. It was designed to control flow, reduce erosion, and provide clean water throughout the site. The terraces served multiple purposes. They created flat land for crops, reduced landslides, and helped manage rainwater. Layers of stone, gravel, and soil allowed water to drain without washing the earth away. This shows a deep understanding of mountain ecology. The Inca were not guessing. They were responding to centuries of experience in similar environments. Machu Picchu was never meant to house a large population. It likely held a few hundred people at most. Archaeological evidence suggests a mix of skilled workers, attendants, and individuals connected to the ruling class. It may have served as a royal estate, a ceremonial center, or a retreat. What matters is that it was part of a wider system, not an isolated wonder. Then, less than a century after it was built, Machu Picchu was abandoned. When the Spanish arrived in the region in the 1530s, the Inca Empire collapsed rapidly due to disease, warfare, and political disruption. Machu Picchu was never mentioned in Spanish records. It was not destroyed, it was simply left behind. Without state support, maintaining a mountaintop city became impossible. People moved to more accessible areas. Forests slowly reclaimed the stone. This abandonment has often been misunderstood. Machu Picchu did not fail. It outlasted the society that built it. Its walls did not crack. Its terraces did not slide away. It was human systems, not engineering, that broke down. In the early 20th century, the site was brought back into global awareness. Excavations revealed how well preserved the city was beneath vegetation. What emerged was not evidence of lost technology, but of careful design grounded in environmental knowledge. Machu Picchu shows what happens when builders respect the land. Every choice reflects awareness of gravity, water, and movement. The absence of cement was not a limitation. It was an advantage. Chapter 6. Baalbek, the heaviest stones ever moved. On the eastern edge of the Bacaya Valley, where mountains frame a wide, fertile plain, stand the ruins of one of the most ambitious building projects of the ancient world. Towering columns rise against the sky. Massive stone platforms stretch outward like artificial cliffs. Even in ruin, the scale is overwhelming. This place is Baalbek, known in Roman times as Heliopolis, the city of the sun. What sets Baalbek apart is not decoration or age, but weight. Built primarily during the Roman period, starting in the 1st century BC and continuing for generations, Baalbek was designed to host some of the largest temples ever constructed by Rome. The Temple of Jupiter in particular stood on a stone platform unlike anything else in the empire. At the heart of that platform lies the feature that continues to puzzle engineers and historians alike, the trilithon. The trilithon consists of 3 limestone blocks, each roughly 19 meters long, 4 meters high, and 3.5 meters deep. Each stone weighs between 700 and 800 tons. They sit perfectly aligned, fitted side by side, several meters above ground level. To this day, they remain among the heaviest stones ever moved and placed by human hands. These stones were not moved from far away. The limestone quarry lies just uphill from the temple complex, about 800 meters away. That distance sounds short, but when stones weigh hundreds of tons, every meter matters. Nearby in the same quarry lies another block, often called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, even larger than the trilithon stones. Excavations have revealed additional unfinished blocks nearby, some weighing more than 1,000 tons. This quarry changes the conversation. It proves the stones were meant to be moved. They were not accidents. They were part of a plan. Roman engineers were known for bold construction. Roads, aqueducts, bridges, and harbors spread across the empire. They used concrete, cranes, pulleys, and standardized tools. But even by Roman standards, Baalbek stands out. No other site used stones of this size in such a way. So how was it done? Archaeology gives us part of the answer. Tool marks on the quarry blocks show the use of iron chisels, levers, and wedges. Channels were cut around the stones. Wooden beams were likely inserted to help pry them free. This was slow, careful work, requiring precision to avoid cracking the stone. Once freed, the stones had to be moved. The most widely accepted explanation involves rollers, sledges, and massive teams of workers. Wooden rollers could be placed beneath the stones. Levers could shift weight gradually. Earth ramps could be built to reduce incline. The Romans were experts at using gravity, not fighting it. Since the quarry sits uphill, the stones could be guided downward toward the temple platform rather than dragged upward. This matters because it reduces the force required. It does not make the task easy, but it makes it possible. Raising the stones into position was another challenge. The trilithon stones are not at ground level. They were placed as part of an elevated retaining wall. This suggests the Romans built up earth ramps to the height of the wall, slid the stones into place, then removed the ramps afterward. Similar techniques are documented at other Roman sites, though never at this scale. No ancient text describes the exact process at Baalbek. That silence fuels speculation. But silence does not equal mystery technology. It simply reflects how normal such work was to Roman builders. They rarely explained methods that were widely understood in their own time. What we do know is that Baalbek was a state-sponsored project. It required imperial funding, military discipline, skilled engineers, and a massive labor force. The temple complex was meant to impress. It marked Roman authority in the eastern provinces. Bigger stones meant greater power, not efficiency. Why choose stones this large at all? One reason may be stability. Large blocks create a solid foundation that resists shifting and settling. Another reason is symbolic. Size communicates dominance. A platform built from stones no one else could move sent a clear message to anyone approaching the city. Yet even with these explanations, uncertainties remain. There is debate about whether the trilithon was part of the original plan or added later. Some scholars suggest the platform predates the Roman temple, possibly built during an earlier phase. Others argue it was entirely Roman, simply an extreme example of known engineering practice. The evidence supports Roman construction, but not every detail is settled. Earthquakes have also altered the site. The region is seismically active. Over centuries, parts of the complex collapsed or shifted. Stones moved from their original positions. This makes reconstruction difficult and adds to the sense of chaos visitors feel today. What Baalbek shows us is not impossibility, but ambition pushed to its limit. The Romans were not trying to be efficient. They were trying to be unforgettable. They used the largest stones they could manage, not because they had to, but because they could. Baalbek remains debated because it sits at the edge of what ancient methods could achieve. It reminds us that ancient engineering was not modest. It was bold, experimental, and sometimes excessive. Chapter 7. Angkor Wat, Engineering a City of Water and Stone. At the edge of the Cambodian jungle, where trees press in from every side and humidity hangs heavy in the air, stone towers rise above the canopy. From a distance, they look almost unreal, like shapes left behind by a dream. This is Angkor, once the heart of the Khmer Empire, and for centuries it was the center of one of the most carefully engineered cities the world had ever seen. Angkor Wat is the most famous structure here, but it is only one part of a much larger system. At its height, between the 9th and 12th centuries, Angkor was not just a temple complex. It was a living city spread across hundreds of square kilometers, home to perhaps 1 million people. What made this possible was not just stone architecture, but water. The land around Angkor looks flat, but it hides a problem. Rain comes in powerful seasonal bursts, followed by long dry periods. Without control, floods destroy crops, and droughts leave fields dry. The Khmer solution was to reshape the land itself. They dug canals, built reservoirs, raised embankments, and connected everything into a single system that could capture, store, and release water when needed. This system began before Angkor Wat itself was built. Early Khmer kings understood that power depended on food. Rice farming required reliable water, and reliable water required planning on a massive scale. Over generations, engineers created enormous reservoirs called barrays, some several kilometers long. These were not decorative lakes. They were functional tools designed to regulate water across the region. Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, sits within this engineered landscape. The temple is surrounded by a wide moat, nearly 200 meters across. The moat helps stabilize the structure by controlling groundwater, preventing erosion and uneven settling. It also symbolized the cosmic ocean surrounding Mount Meru, the sacred center of the universe in Hindu belief. Moving the stone to build Angkor Wat was itself a major task. The temple is constructed mainly from sandstone, quarried from the Kulin Hills, more than 40 kilometers away. Blocks were cut using iron tools, then transported along canals and rivers. Water transport was far more efficient than hauling stone over land, and the Khmer made full use of it. This is where Angkor's engineering brilliance becomes clear. The same canals that watered rice fields also served as transport routes. Stone blocks could be floated on barges, guided downstream toward construction sites. From there, they were dragged short distances and lifted into place using ramps, levers, and coordinated labor. No wheels were needed. Gravity and water did most of the work. The temple itself shows careful planning at every level. Angkor Wat is laid out along a strict east-west axis. Its towers rise in stepped layers, each level representing a different realm of the cosmos. Walls are covered with bas-reliefs depicting gods, kings, and battles, carved directly into stone surfaces. These carvings required skilled artisans and years of focused work. But Angkor Wat was not alone. Surrounding it were other temples, administrative centers, neighborhoods, markets, and farms. Wooden houses once filled the spaces between stone monuments. These structures are gone now, but traces remain in soil patterns and post holes. What survives in stone is only a small part of what once existed. For centuries, the system worked. Water flowed where it was needed. Crops grew reliably. The empire expanded outward, controlling trade routes and collecting tribute. The king ruled not just through force, but through control of resources. Maintaining the water system was a political act. Those who controlled water controlled life. Yet this strength also became a weakness. The system was vast but fragile. It required constant maintenance. Canals had to be cleared. Embankments had to be repaired. Reservoirs had to be managed carefully to avoid overflow or stagnation. As long as the central authority remained strong, this was possible. Climate records from tree rings and lake sediments tell us that conditions began to change in the later centuries of Angkor's history. Periods of intense rainfall alternated with long droughts. Floods damaged canals. Dry years reduced water supply. The system, designed for stability, struggled with extremes. Archaeological evidence shows attempts to adapt. Canals were modified. New channels were cut. Old ones were abandoned. These changes suggest stress, not sudden collapse. The city did not fall overnight. It strained, adjusted, and continued for generations. Political shifts added to the pressure. Power moved away from Angkor. New centers rose. Maintaining such a massive system no longer made sense as authority weakened and trade routes shifted. Slowly, people left the city. Stone temples remained, but the living network that supported them faded. What Angkor shows us is not mystery, but scale. The Khmer did not need modern tools to build a city of stone and water. They needed time, labor, and knowledge passed down over centuries. Their success was built on understanding the land. Their decline came when the balance between nature and infrastructure was pushed too far. Chapter 8, Easter Island Moai, Moving Statues Without Wheels. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continent, lies one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. For ancient sailors approaching it for the first time, the sight must have been startling. A small island, ringed by cliffs with no rivers and few trees, and yet rising along its shores and hillsides stood enormous stone figures, silent and watchful. These statues are the Moai of Rapa Nui, often called Easter Island, and their presence raises one of the most enduring questions in archaeology. How were they moved without wheels, metal tools, or animals? The story begins with the arrival of people on the island around 1200 AD. These settlers did not drift there by accident. They navigated across open ocean using canoes, guided by stars, winds, and currents. This alone speaks to a high level of skill and shared knowledge. When they arrived, the island looked very different from today. Forests covered much of the land, including tall palm trees found nowhere else on Earth. Seabirds nested in huge numbers. The environment was limited, but it was rich enough to support a growing society if managed carefully. Over time, villages formed along the coast. People farmed sweet potatoes, taro, and other crops, using stone gardens that helped retain moisture and protect soil from wind. Fresh water was scarce, often coming from underground seepage near the shore rather than streams or lakes. Life on Rapa Nui required constant attention to balance and cooperation. Within this society, the tradition of carving Moai began. The statues were carved from volcanic tuff at a crater called Rano Raraku, located in the center of the island. Today, hundreds of unfinished statues still lie there, frozen at different stages of completion. Archaeologists can follow the entire process. Carvers worked directly on the rock face, shaping the statue while it was still attached to the stone. Details like the nose, jaw, and torso were added first. Only at the end was the statue cut free from the bedrock. Stone tools made from basalt were used for carving. Thousands of these tools have been found at the site. They wear down quickly, which explains why so many were needed. The work was slow, physical, and repetitive. There is no evidence of metal tools or machines. Everything about the process points to human hands and patience. Once carved, the statue had to be moved. For many years, researchers assumed the Moai were dragged on wooden sleds or rollers. This idea fit with earlier beliefs that large-scale deforestation occurred to support statue transport. But this explanation created problems. Dragging statues face down would damage them, and there was little direct evidence for large sled systems across the island. Over the last few decades, a different explanation has gained strong support. Experiments conducted by archaeologists and engineers showed that Moai could be moved upright by rocking them side to side using ropes. With teams pulling alternately from left and right, the statue walks forward. This method requires coordination, but not excessive wood or complex equipment. Importantly, it matches oral traditions recorded from Rapa Nui elders, who said the statues walked to their platforms. This matters because it changes how we understand the island's resources. Moving statues upright reduces the need for large amounts of timber. It also explains why many statues were found upright along ancient paths. Some that fell may have tipped during transport, not been abandoned mid-drag. The destination of the Moai was equally important. Most statues were placed on stone platforms called ahu, built along the coast. These platforms faced inland, toward villages and farmland. The Moai were not meant to look out to sea. They were meant to watch over the living. In Rapa Nui belief, the statues represented ancestors. Their presence reinforced authority, memory, and protection. Raising a Moai onto an ahu required careful planning. Ramps of earth and stone were likely used. Once in place, a red stone top knot, called a pukao, was added to some statues. These were carved from a different quarry and placed last, further increasing the challenge. This entire system worked for centuries. During this time, the island's environment slowly changed. Forests declined. Soil became harder to manage. The reasons were multiple. Trees were used for canoes, housing, and daily life. Rats introduced by settlers ate seeds, preventing regrowth. Climate shifts affected rainfall patterns. None of this happened overnight. As resources became more limited, Rapa Nui society adapted. Farming methods changed. Stone gardens became more common. Social structures shifted. At some point, the tradition of raising new Moai slowed and eventually stopped. Many statues were toppled, likely during periods of internal conflict or social change. This was not total collapse, but transformation. By the time Europeans first arrived in 1722, the island society was already under strain. The Moai tradition had ended, but people were still living there, farming, fishing, and adapting. The most severe damage came later, with disease, slave raids, and colonial control in the 19th century. These events reduced the population dramatically and disrupted cultural continuity. Modern research now paints a clearer picture. The people of Rapa Nui did not destroy themselves through reckless behavior. They lived in one of the most isolated environments on Earth and managed it for generations. When conditions changed, they adjusted, sometimes painfully. The Moai stand as evidence of coordination, belief, and engineering without wheels or metal. They are not symbols of mystery technology, but of human ingenuity under extreme limits. Chapter 9. Petra, Carving a City into Stone. Hidden among narrow canyons in southern Jordan lies a city that seems to emerge directly from the rock itself. There are no freestanding walls announcing its presence from afar. Instead, smooth cliff faces suddenly open into carved facades, columns and doorways, all cut straight into rose-colored sandstone. This is Petra, and its builders did not assemble it stone by stone. They carved it away. Petra was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom, a powerful trading society that flourished between roughly 300 BC and 100 AD. The Nabateans controlled key caravan routes that linked Arabia, the Mediterranean, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Spices, incense, textiles, and precious goods flowed through their territory. Petra grew wealthy not by conquest, but by controlling movement. The city's location was chosen carefully. Petra sits in a natural basin, surrounded by steep cliffs and accessible mainly through a narrow gorge known as the Sick. This made it defensible, but it also created challenges. Rainfall in the region is low and unpredictable. Flash floods can be sudden and violent. Any city built here had to manage water with extreme care. The Nabateans understood this from the beginning. Before carving grand facades, they reshaped the landscape. Channels were cut into rock walls to redirect rainwater. Dams were built to slow floods. Cisterns stored water for dry months. Clay pipes carried water across long distances. These systems were integrated into the city itself, hidden behind carvings and beneath streets. Petra's water system was not an afterthought. It was the foundation that made everything else possible. The most famous structure in Petra is the treasury, carved into a cliff face at the end of the CQ. Its columns, pediments, and sculpted figures look almost delicate, but they are part of a solid rock wall. The structure was not built upward. It was carved downward, starting from the top and moving toward the ground. This technique mattered. By carving from the top down, builders avoided rockfall onto finished sections below. They could work safely while scaffolding was anchored above. Tool marks still visible on some surfaces show consistent horizontal strokes, matching the reach of a standing worker. These details tell us how the work progressed, step by step. The tools were simple but effective. Iron chisels, mallets, and stone hammers were used to remove sandstone. The rock itself is relatively soft compared to granite or limestone, making it suitable for carving. Precision came from careful measurement and repetition, not from advanced machinery. Scaffolding played a key role. Wooden beams were set into carved holes in the rock face. Platforms were built outward from the cliff. As sections were completed, scaffolding was moved downward. Evidence of these beam holes can still be seen today, high above ground level on unfinished or eroded surfaces. Petra was not carved all at once. Like many ancient cities, it grew over time. Early Nabatean structures were simpler, focusing on tombs and water control. As wealth increased, facades became more elaborate. Greek and Roman architectural styles influenced decoration, reflecting Petra's position as a crossroads of cultures. Columns, capitals, and symmetrical designs appear, but they are carved, not assembled. This distinction is important. Petra's beauty often leads people to imagine lost technology, but nothing at the site requires tools beyond what the Nabateans clearly possessed. The scale is impressive, but the methods are understandable. What made Petra exceptional was planning. Builders had to visualize entire structures before carving began. Mistakes could not be undone easily. A wrong cut might ruin a facade. This required experience and shared standards. Skilled stoneworkers passed techniques from one generation to the next. Designs followed patterns. Measurements were consistent. The city reflects a professional building culture, not improvisation. Beyond tombs and monuments, Petra was a living city. Archaeology has uncovered remains of houses, markets, temples, and administrative buildings. Many were built using traditional masonry rather than carving. Stone blocks, mortar, and reused materials filled the spaces between cliffs. The carved facades were often tombs, not homes. They served as markers of status and memory. Their visibility mattered. They faced pathways and open areas, signaling presence and identity in stone. Petra's prosperity depended on trade, and trade depends on stability. As Roman power expanded, trade routes shifted. Sea routes became more efficient than overland caravans. Petra was absorbed into the Roman Empire in 106 AD. The city remained active for centuries, but its central role faded. Earthquakes damaged buildings. Maintaining water systems became harder as population declined. By the early medieval period, Petra was largely abandoned. It was never destroyed in a single event. It simply became less useful. Without trade, the reason for maintaining such a complex city disappeared. People moved on. Sand and silence filled the streets. When Petra was rediscovered by European travelers in the 19th century, its emptiness fed myths. How could such a city exist and vanish? The answer lies not in mystery, but in economics and environment. Petra was built to serve a purpose. When that purpose ended, the city slowly returned to stone. Petra shows what is possible when architecture adapts to landscape. The Nabateans did not fight the cliffs. They used them. They turned rock into walls, mountains into monuments, and scarcity into strength. Chapter 10. Great Zimbabwe. Monumental walls without mortar. On a high plateau in southern Africa, where granite outcrops rise from open grassland, a city of stone once stood as a center of power, trade, and identity. Its walls curve smoothly across the landscape. They rise without mortar, without arches, without visible foundations. Yet they have endured for centuries. This place is Great Zimbabwe, and for a long time its story was misunderstood. Great Zimbabwe was built between the 11th and 15th centuries by ancestors of the Shona-speaking peoples. At its height, it was the largest stone-built city in sub-Saharan Africa. The name itself comes from a local word meaning stone houses. That description is simple, but what it represents is anything but. The most striking feature of Great Zimbabwe is its dry stone architecture. Granite blocks were shaped and stacked with care, relying only on gravity and balance to hold them in place. Some walls reach more than 10 meters in height and extend for hundreds of meters. The most famous enclosure, often called the Great Enclosure, forms a massive oval wall with a narrow entrance passage and a tall conical tower inside. No mortar binds these stones together. This was not due to a lack of knowledge. It was a deliberate technique. Granite in this region breaks naturally into flat slabs when heated and cooled. Builders selected stones of similar size and shape, then stacked them in slightly inward-leaning courses. This created stability. As with other dry stone systems around the world, flexibility was a strength. The walls could settle and adjust over time without collapsing. Archaeological studies show clear variation in masonry style across the site. Early walls are rougher, using larger, less uniform stones. Later walls are more refined, with tightly fitted blocks and decorative patterns. This tells us two things. First, Great Zimbabwe was built over generations. Second, stoneworking skills improved over time, passed down through experience rather than formal plans. The city itself was not a single structure, but a complex of zones. There is the hill complex, built atop a rocky outcrop with narrow passages and commanding views of the surrounding land. There is the great enclosure below, with its massive walls and interior spaces. And there are the valley ruins, spread across the landscape, where people lived, worked, and traded. Together, these areas formed a layered city, both physically and socially. Great Zimbabwe was not isolated. Excavations have uncovered glass beads from the Middle East, porcelain from China, and coins from the Indian Ocean Trade Network. These objects arrived through long-distance trade routes linking inland Africa to coastal ports and beyond. Gold was the key export. The region around Great Zimbabwe was rich in gold deposits, and control over this resource brought wealth and influence. This trade wealth supported large populations and specialized labor. Some people mined gold. Others herded cattle, farmed crops, shaped stone, or managed exchange. The scale of construction suggests organized leadership capable of directing labor and resources over long periods. This was not a temporary settlement, it was a capital. For much of the 20th century, this reality was denied. Early European visitors could not accept that African societies built Great Zimbabwe. Myths were invented. Foreign builders were imagined. These ideas were not based on evidence, but on prejudice. Archaeology has since corrected this. Radiocarbon dating, material culture, and continuity with local traditions all confirm that Great Zimbabwe was built by African hands. Understanding how the walls were built helps ground the site in reality. Granite blocks were shaped using hammerstones. Builders did not cut stone into exact forms. Instead, they selected stones that naturally fit together. Courses were laid carefully, with smaller stones used to adjust gaps and distribute weight. Over time, walls were raised higher, always maintaining balance. This required skill, but not mystery. The design choices also reflect meaning. Wall patterns, such as chevron designs, appear repeatedly. These were not structural necessities. They were decorative, symbolic, and intentional. They communicated identity and authority. Stone was not just material, it was language. The conical tower inside the great enclosure has drawn special attention. Its function is still debated. It may have symbolized grain storage, abundance, or leadership. What matters is that it was not random. It stood at the center of the enclosure, visible and deliberate. So why was Great Zimbabwe abandoned? Chapter 10. Great Zimbabwe. Monumental walls without mortar. On a high plateau in southern Africa, where granite outcrops rise from open grassland, a city of stone once stood as a center of power, trade, and identity. Its walls curve smoothly across the landscape. They rise without mortar, without arches, without visible foundations. Yet they have endured for centuries. This place is Great Zimbabwe, and for a long time its story was misunderstood. Great Zimbabwe was built between the 11th and 15th centuries by ancestors of the Shona-speaking peoples. At its height, it was the largest stone-built city in sub-Saharan Africa. The name itself comes from a local word meaning stone houses. That description is simple, but what it represents is anything but. The most striking feature of Great Zimbabwe is its dry stone architecture. Granite blocks were shaped and stacked with care, relying only on gravity and balance to hold them in place. Some walls reach more than 10 meters in height and extend for hundreds of meters. The most famous enclosure, often called the Great Enclosure, forms a massive oval wall with a narrow entrance passage and a tall conical tower inside. No mortar binds these stones together. This was not due to a lack of knowledge. It was a deliberate technique. Granite in this region breaks naturally into flat slabs when heated and cooled. Builders selected stones of similar size and shape, then stacked them in slightly inward-leaning courses. This created stability. As with other dry stone systems around the world, flexibility was a strength. The walls could settle and adjust over time without collapsing. Archaeological studies show clear variation in masonry style across the site. Early walls are rougher, using larger, less uniform stones. Later walls are more refined, with tightly fitted blocks and decorative patterns. This tells us two things. First, Great Zimbabwe was built over generations. Second, stoneworking skills improved over time, passed down through experience rather than formal plans. The city itself was not a single structure, but a complex of zones. There is the hill complex, built atop a rocky outcrop with narrow passages and commanding views of the surrounding land. There is the great enclosure below, with its massive walls and interior spaces. And there are the valley ruins, spread across the landscape, where people lived, worked, and traded. Together, these areas formed a layered city, both physically and socially. Great Zimbabwe was not isolated. Excavations have uncovered glass beads from the Middle East, porcelain from China, and coins from the Indian Ocean Trade Network. These objects arrived through long-distance trade routes linking inland Africa to coastal ports and beyond. Gold was the key export. The region around Great Zimbabwe was rich in gold deposits, and control over this resource brought wealth and influence. This trade wealth supported large populations and specialized labor. Some people mined gold. Others herded cattle, farmed crops, shaped stone, or managed exchange. The scale of construction suggests organized leadership capable of directing labor and resources over long periods. This was not a temporary settlement, it was a capital. For much of the 20th century, this reality was denied. Early European visitors could not accept that African societies built Great Zimbabwe. Myths were invented. Foreign builders were imagined. These ideas were not based on evidence, but on prejudice. Archaeology has since corrected this. Radiocarbon dating, material culture, and continuity with local traditions all confirm that Great Zimbabwe was built by African hands. Understanding how the walls were built helps ground the site in reality. Granite blocks were shaped using hammerstones. Builders did not cut stone into exact forms. Instead, they selected stones that naturally fit together. Courses were laid carefully, with smaller stones used to adjust gaps and distribute weight. Over time, walls were raised higher, always maintaining balance. This required skill, but not mystery. The design choices also reflect meaning. Wall patterns, such as chevron designs, appear repeatedly. These were not structural necessities. They were decorative, symbolic, and intentional. They communicated identity and authority. Stone was not just material, it was language. The conical tower inside the great enclosure has drawn special attention. Its function is still debated. It may have symbolized grain storage, abundance, or leadership. What matters is that it was not random. It stood at the center of the enclosure, visible and deliberate. So why was Great Zimbabwe abandoned?